listeners. Welcome to episode 4 of Plano's Political Pitbull podcast. I am Esther.
And I am Ruth.
And today's episode is all about corporate welfare, also known as economic fascism.
So I can't really say I know anything about corporate welfare, or as you call it, economic fascism. But you wrote on this not too long ago, right? On our website?
I did. I wrote a piece on this at planospoliticalpitbull.com because on Monday, June 24th, 2024, Plano City Council passed a grant of $750,000. I'm going to repeat that number, $750,000 of our taxpayer money to a company called Foundry Commercial Holdings. And in exchange for our tax dollars, the company agrees to demolish the building at 2700 West Plano Parkway. And they are going to build a larger building valued at $21 million. So if you would like to know more about that deal, you can read it at our website, planospoliticalpitbull.com. Because today, I want to talk strictly about corporate welfare.
Yeah, see, I don't know what that means. What does that mean, corporate welfare, exactly?
So some people refer to it as economic development, grants, crony capitalism, and economic fascism. Whatever you call it, it is all the same thing. And cities and states and the federal government all do it. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of corporate welfare, let's define our terms, because a lot of times people have issues because they're not defining their terms. So let's go over some economic definitions. So capitalism is the private ownership of property and the free ability to exchange something of value for something else of value. So an example is I have dollars and I want to trade my dollars for apples. Now, Ruth, you are going to be an apple farmer in this example, and you own an apple orchard and you have lots of apples, and you want dollars more than you want the apples.
Okay.
So you'd like to exchange your apples for dollars. I value the apples more than I value my dollars, and you value the dollars more than you value your apples. And the only way that exchange for apples and dollars happens is if we both benefit and we can both agree on the terms. There is no role for government here. There is no need for a large central planner to come in and dictate how we're going to do the exchange of dollars and apples and everything. No, this is just you and me coming to a mutually beneficial agreement to exchange dollars for apples.
Right, we're just gonna barter for the best deal for both of us.
Exactly. And that is what we are supposed to be living under in this country. We are supposed to be a capitalist economy, free market economy. But really begs the question, are we? So our next economic policy is called fascism.
This one always confuses me. This is where I get confused.
Okay. Well,
Because to me, I get confused between fascism and socialism. They seem so similar to me. So when you say like economic fascism, but like it's under, there's like capitalist stuff happening, it just gets all muddled.
Well, let me try to clear that up. Now, when you think of fascism, you usually think of violence, and there is a violent component to Mussolini's political ideology. He was the brainchild of fascism, but He also had an economic theory, and he called it corporatism. And basically, simplistically, property and goods, okay, and the means to make those goods are both privately owned. So you can still own your farm, and you still own the apples that you make from the farm. However, where government comes in is government regulates every single solitary thing on how the goods are made and sold.
Isn't that kind of how we already live currently in America? I mean, like, our medical care system is heavily regulated, factories are heavily regulated, everything's heavily regulated.
Well, one could argue that we are a little more fascistic than we are capitalistic, because we are, in some aspects, regulated to death. I mean, they'll tell you, under fascism, they'll tell you what kind of apples to grow, how to grow them, what kind of equipment to use, how much to pay your workers, and so on and so on and so on. And these regulations make it very difficult for you, or anyone, but let's say you in our apple example, to grow your products, your apples. Difficult for the factory, difficult for anyone to actually make anything.
Right, because then you have to like factor in, maybe they want you to get specific equipment and you don't have the money for said equipment. Mm-hmm. So then you have to try and make up that money, or you know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying. I mean, there is a rule that you have to have a mop sink. For most businesses. I know a medical facility, it has to have a mop sink. Now, I don't know a lot of people who use the old-fashioned mops anymore. We have these new technology mops where you actually just throw away the pad. So there's no need for a mop sink. But
mop sinks are actually dirtier than the modern technology we have now for mops. Exactly. So that's why people don't use them anymore.
Exactly. And you don't have to wash the mop anymore. So therefore you wouldn't need a mop sink. But try to tell a regulator or a bureaucrat, well, I don't want to use the old-fashioned mop that you have to wash and wring out. I want to use a Swiffer mop. Doesn't matter. You still need a mop sink. So this just costs more to do business. Now, maybe because everything costs more, you are going to have to, you're going to need help. So the government gives subsidies in the form of taxpayer dollars to help the apple farmer, in our example, out. Maybe they say, well, we're going to give you money, and for our money, you can grow Gala apples instead of Granny Smith apples. Well, that might be good for those who are growing Gala apples, but then, first of all, maybe they're not going to give your competitor the same money for growing Granny Smiths. So now, what do you think is going to happen with the farmers? What do you think they're going to pivot to if they realize we're going to get money if we grow Gala apples instead of Granny Smith apples?
Well, they're going to grow the Gala apples.
Yes, they'll dump the Granny Smiths and they'll grow Galas instead. We see this happen with corn. There are major tax subsidies in corn and soybeans, and we have an abundance of corn and soybeans, so much that we don't know what to do with. In our apples example, what will happen is they'll dump the Granny Smiths and they'll start growing Gala apples, and there will be a flood of Gala apples and very few Granny Smith apples, and now...
Which means the Granny Smith apples would cost more.
Yes. You got it. See, you understand this. You understand it.
It's in there somewhere.
Yes, you understand this. And so, yes, we're going to have a shortage of Granny Smiths, which is going to raise the price of grannies. And we're going to have a flood of galas, and that's going to lower the price of the gala apples, or gala apples, sorry. So, under this scenario, this was Mussolini's brainchild, and this occurred mostly in Italy under Mussolini during his time. Okay, now let's move on to socialism. So, socialism is when the government owns the means of production, but individuals owns the goods produced. So, in your case, Ruth, you can't own the land or the equipment on the orchard, but you can grow and own the apples that you produce. Same thing if you were making pens in a factory. You can't own the factory. The government owns the factory. The government owns the equipment. But you get to own the pens that you make, and you can sell the pens that you make in the factory. And this was a model that Germany had under Hitler. Yes, surprisingly, the Nazis were actually socialists. People confuse the Nazis with fascists because, again, of that violent component.
Well, I do know this, he took a lot of inspiration from Mussolini. So you have that nationalism component that they both shared, and so people associate Hitler with fascism because of that.
Yes, but in the name Nazi, the stands for
The S.
The S stands for socialist. Yes. And today, and if you fast forward to the present, we see this type of system under Venezuela today, and it's doing terribly in Venezuela. And our last and most severe case economic system is communism, and this is where the government owns everything. They would own the orchard, they would own the apples, and Ruth owns nothing. And we saw this under Stalin in the USSR, and fast forward to the day, we see this in North Korea.
Or Cuba.
Or Cuba, yes. Now, the problems with fascism, we're going to just focus on fascism because corporate welfare is under fascism. The problems with economic fascism is the overregulation. That's the first problem. People are having a tough time going into business. Great example is we here at Plano's Political Pitbull thought it could be a good idea if we started making some healthy muffin dog treats. And we have a great recipe, and we thought we could supplement our income, help with our website, with us podcast, if we made and sold some doggy muffins. And unfortunately, with all the regulations that goes into creating, making, and selling
food products,
dog treats, okay, treats for dogs, it was too cumbersome, too much, too expensive,
too complicated,
way too complicated. I mean, just your lettering, your font size on the box is regulated. The ounces, the weight of what's in the box has to be in a certain spot on the box. It has to be a certain font size. So just the font size is being controlled. Could you imagine actually what's going into physically making the muffins for dogs.
Like what kind of equipment or kitchen type regulations they're trying to impose. That's just not financially possible for a lot of people.
Yes. So it's good for the people who are already in the dog treat business.
Or any food business.
Yes, like Purina and Milk-Bone. They have it down. They're a very large company. But it's bad for the consumer because it means fewer choices for the consumer, which means higher prices. Now,
It also means it's harder to get in to the business.
Yeah, it makes getting into business very complicated. And this is not just for dog treats, obviously. This is across the board. Now, the other problem with economic fascism is government hands out taxpayers money, okay? When it does that, it has to basically rob Peter to pay Paul. It's got to take money from the taxpayer, money that the taxpayer didn't voluntarily decide it wanted to give, and it's going to give it to the large company. And that means that the taxpayer has less to spend on things that they need and things that they want. Maybe they want to save up for something. They can't do that. So every dollar that people have to work for to pay for taxes means less freedom and less liberty they have. Because instead of working for themselves and their own goals and needs, people are working for government's needs, wants, and goals. And a lot of times those things do not add up, do not match up. Okay? I mean, Ruth, if you had a choice between roads and parks, which would you rather have?
Fixing the roads?
Fixing the roads, exactly.
Finishing the projects they've already started?
Right. And I honestly would rather have better roads than a park I'm never going to use. So there you have my goals don't line up, and your goals, we line up, but they're not lining up with government's.
So I just need to clarify. Is part of fascism is government giving money to businesses. Am I following?
That is part of the economic fascism. Yes. It's your subsidizing, working with companies.
And that goes into your example with the apples, with the government gives money to incentivize making farming Gala apples instead of the Granny Smith.
Right.
So if even if consumers want Granny Smith apples, you have like this great recipe that uses Granny Smith apples. Well, you're gonna have to pay a bit more because not as many farms are growing them. Am I following?
Yes. Another example of a subsidy would be what we see in the green industry. There is a whole lot of money from government, from the taxpayers, because remember, the government doesn't make any money, okay? It doesn't produce any money. It doesn't sell anything, it mostly just takes your money and gives it to somebody else. So there's a whole lot of government subsidies in the green economy, all right? Solar panels, greener types of fuel, electric cars, all sorts of things. And the government, to incentivize companies to make these things, they will give them loads of money and all kinds of tax credits, subsidies, maybe help out with regulations or lowering regulations to make it easier for them to build these things. There's a tax credit. If I, as a homeowner, want to put solar panels on my roof, guess what? I could get a tax credit, which means I could get more money back from the government. Making energy efficient appliances. But instead of letting the free market dictate if the companies are going to make those things, it's government putting its hand in there and saying, well, here, we'll give you this money and you go and make these things. And then, people buy them. Well, we've seen that a lot of time that's not true. People aren't waiting and standing in line for an electric car.
Well, they're also too expensive. The technology's too new.
Right. They definitely are very expensive. I think the cheapest one was 60 grand the last time I looked. So here you have a new technology. Well, the thing that would naturally happen is a new technology comes out. If it is good, if it works well, people will go to the store or go to wherever they are supposed to buy it and they will buy it. And it will take off. You didn't need a subsidy for the VCR.
Well, typically what happened, at least in the past, like for regular cars that everyone drives now, originally those were you only saw the elites driving cars. And then as time went on and making them became more efficient and cheaper, the cars themselves got a bit more accessible, and so then you had a lot more people buying them, you had a lot more demand for them, and we kind of just went from there, and now you can't go anywhere without a car in some places.
In some places. In other places, like New York City, don't really need a car. But the point is that Ford did not need a subsidy when he first produced his car. He didn't get any money from the government to make that car, to create the assembly line, to make it more efficient, more affordable for people to have a car. Government was nowhere in that process. Same thing with most new technologies. I mean, this is not a new technology, but the television. When the television first came out, it did not require any subsidies. No one needed any help getting that from the government, getting that to market and getting people to buy it. Computers. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs did not get a dime for their inventions. They made a product. It was a good product, and it succeeded on its own without any help. And when you take more money from people to give it to businesses, that has certain consequences. And one of the consequences is small business owners have less money than that they can use to maybe expand their business.
So is the federal government, they've been trying to put in more, what's it called, charging stations for the electric car everywhere. Would that be considered economic fascism?
Yes, if they want to help get this mainstream, they're going to need charging stations. And instead of letting Tesla put in its own charging stations, or whoever is going to put in the charging stations,
or whoever feels like they see a potential benefit towards them, I'm blinking on the words right now, benefit towards them
putting in the charging station, an economic benefit to them, profitable.
Like, it's...
A person is not going to put in a charging station unless it benefits them, okay? So...
a business opportunity. That's what I was trying to think of.
Okay, a business opportunity, right.
Instead of they're seeing opportunity instead of gas station, these electric cars are really popping off. maybe I should hop on the train and get on and lead the industry in charging stations, so that I can get some a cut of the pie, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, in this industry, you're making a whole new pie because this is a brand new pie. But yes, these cars need charging stations, and there can be a whole industry just for charging stations. Look, just like there's a whole industry for gas stations. And the problem is that government is now getting its nose in there and saying, we've got to get somebody to build these charging stations. And it was very, very funny. There was a thing I saw on television the other day where the federal government was going to give money for charging stations in this particular city. I think it was somewhere in Chicago, but don't quote me on that. And it was billions of dollars that they were going to give this city to put in charging stations. And so this reporter says to people on the street, oh, the government is going to give this city lots and lots of money. And people are saying, oh, that's great. We could really use it for our schools, for our neighborhoods. And then the reporter says, well, it's going to be used for electric car charging stations. And I kid you not, this woman said, we don't have electric cars here. We don't need that. And government, of course, is saying what these people need. But I guarantee you, if that was a business would know right off the bat, okay, there are no electric cars here. We need to not put them here. We need to put them somewhere else. Well, they wouldn't know exactly where you would need an electric car station.
And if they tried, they would immediately not gain any money and just go out of business within, a month?
Mm-hmm, exactly. Because if nobody's charging their car, they're not going to make any money. And that is the point. Here you have the government basically giving money to an industry or to a city to get charging stations. Now, the city's not in the charging station business, so obviously they're going to have to get some private company to put in the charging stations. Well, that helps that business, but the business owner on the corner, he doesn't get to keep his money, and maybe his business, instead of grows, it now shrinks and possibly closes.
Apparently, the government's even having trouble finding people or companies who are going to build these charging stations because they only have 7 built across the entire United States.
7 charging stations?
Yes, in total, across the country.
Wait, 7 like gas station type things, charging stations, or are we just talking individual chargers? Because I know of a few we have here in Plano, but so like large charging stations, multiple.
I think they mean like stations, kind of like
a gas station, but for electric cars.
I think so.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that.
Okay. Because that ain't a lot. I mean, I don't think you could go from California to New York in an electric car if there's only 7 charging stations.
Yeah, apparently they've been having trouble finding companies
willing to do this.
Well, not only willing, that they themselves are willing to put money into for them to build.
Okay. Well, whether it is electric cars, charging station, or apples, in our Apple case, if government stays out of these businesses or any business, the only thing that would determine prices would be the natural forces of the market, which are supply and demand. If there is a demand for gala apples or electric cars, there will be a supply for them because some somebody will come, some entrepreneurial person will come and fill that hole. Speaking of government subsidies, the other problem with corporate welfare or fascism is corruption. And let me tell you, it's ripe for corruption. Because the government has to enter into public-private partnerships. Okay, they have to work together, and they have to pick companies. Well, how are they going to pick these companies? Well, are they going to pick them because their CEO maybe donated to the politician's campaign? We see this in the federal government all the time. President Biden just gave a subsidy to a green energy company that coincidentally donated to his campaign. What a coinky ding. Politicians also pass favorable regulations and laws for businesses that happen to donate to their campaign. What a coincidence. No, it's not. It is not a coincidence. This is why you see companies will donate to the Democrats and the Republicans in the same race. So companies let's take the presidency. There are companies right now that are donating to President Biden and donating to President Trump because they want to make sure that no matter who wins, the company wins. So ripe for corruption. And the other another problem is that tax money only benefits a select few instead of all the residents. So let's take our own city of Plano, for example. There is $54 million, precisely $54,643,763 left in the Economic Development Fund. Okay? Now, if that money wasn't there, what else could that money be used for? It could be used to fix roads. It could be used to actually lower the tax rate. According to our city manager, $6 million is every penny of the tax rate. So for every penny in the tax rate, that's $6 million. So they could take 9 cents off the tax rate in Plano with $54 million. We also have a budget problem. We have a budget deficit of $60 million that they are predicting for the 2025 city budget. Gee, I think I know where $54 million could come from to close up that hole. But no, instead they'll keep using that money to give out to businesses that don't need it or don't deserve it. And the taxpayers will have to close up that $60 million deficit. Unless, of course, government does something it will never do, actually cut stuff. So do you know what a TIF is? Have you ever heard of that?
I've heard of couples having a tiff. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, it's another part of corporate welfare, actually. No, TIF stands for tax increment financing. And sometimes they are called tax increment financing redevelopment zones. Doesn't that sound so fancy?
Where was the Z in TIF?
Well, that would be actually what they call a TERS. If you added the reinvestment zone, or reinvestment zone.
Wouldn't it be more like TIFers?
Sometimes the acronyms just don't work out. But the goal of a TIF or a TERS or TIFers is to spur development or redevelopment. So the problem with these zones is that they don't share with everyone else. They get to keep all the tax money that they generate. So all of their property taxes that come from that zone stays in that zone. And it doesn't get shared with the rest of the city. So we have a few of these in Plano. They have a few of these in Chicago. They have a few of these all over the nation. And everyone is a little different on how it's set up. But in Plano, it is, these areas are basically their money is in a fund and it's dealt out through a committee. We have about 5 of them now in Plano. And Collin Creek is one of these, but the residents or the future residents of the Collin Creek redevelopment, they don't just stay in their zone, okay? They go and they drive on other streets in the city, and they will still use police and fire services and other services from the city and other resources, but they're not paying in to the whole city. Their money is staying within their little zone. And the city manager made a direct connection between our $60 million deficit here and these zones. Because, again, money doesn't go all into the same pot, it only stays there. So they'll get to use that money to fix their streets when it's time for their streets to need repairs and their issue and any of their things that they use there. But anything outside of that little zone, well, oh well, too bad, taxpayers who don't live in the zone, you're on the hook for it. How's that sound to you?
Hey, Concrete, stay in your lane. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, well, just stay in your zone, right? No, unfortunately not. And so now it's costing our budget a big, big hole that we have to fill. Now there's another thing that they use for corporate welfare. Isn't this great? You've got subsidies, you've got TIFs, you also have tax abatements. You know what a tax abatement is?
No.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you. It's where basically the government says, come to us, come move businesses to our neighborhood, and we will freeze your taxes, and you will not have to pay any taxes for a certain amount of years. So New York did this. It was ads all over the television in Texas down here saying, New York, come to New York, businesses, move your business to New York, and you won't have to pay any taxes for 10 years. Except that when the business moves there, I'm sure that they're going to be using New York resources and New York police and fire and all these things that will still have to be paid for. And we've done this in Plano. I think we did it with Toyota when Toyota moved here. I don't remember who else we did it with, but we've done it a few times. So the thing that we often hear when anybody goes to city council or anywhere and they say, enough with the fascism, enough with the corporatism, enough with the crony capitalism. The excuse we always hear is, well, everyone is doing it. And if we don't do it, they'll just go to Frisco, or they'll go to Prosper, or they'll go to Allen, and we'll lose out. Sounds like, but Mom, everybody else is doing it. To which mothers for generations have said, well, if they jumped in a lake, would you do it too?
I thought it was if you jumped off a bridge.
That's a good one too. That's an oldie but a goodie.
At least that's what my mom said.
Yes. So What would be great is if all cities and states would stop doing this, and even the federal government. And the only way that's going to happen is if we tell all of our reps, enough with the corporate welfare. Let's start being capitalist again. I mean, when you ask companies, if they would just ask companies, when you ask them, why did you choose to move to Plano or Frisco or any location? The things that companies say themselves was low taxes, a good workforce, good laws, and low regulations. That's what they're thinking of when they decide to relocate. So if the government were to just focus on having those things instead of bribing companies to do something or move there, then or build something, we all would be a lot better for it.
It's like instead of bribing your customers to come into your store, why not just make it more desirable to come?
Offer them something that they want, that they need. Exactly. You have a good product, a good service, you will bring customers in.
And in this case, for businesses, it's low regulation, low taxes, good workforce, good laws.
Exactly. You got it. See, you understand this.
I'm smart.
I have some good news. You are smart. I have some good news for you.
What?
Luna was adopted.
Yay!
So we have a new pit bull of the week, and it's Jackson. Jackson is just the cutest. He is about 2 years old and a very obedient little boy. He is house trained. That's always a plus when they come house trained. And keeps his kennel very clean. Jackson is very smart and will stop when he realizes that the leash is not around his neck anymore. He is a sweet boy who was never claimed by his owner. Oh, poor Jackson. Jackson is at the Plano Animal Shelter, and for more information, you can go to our website, Plano's Political Pit Bull, and click on the button Pit Bulls for Adoption to find out more about Jackson. Getting a pet is a big responsibility and commitment for the life of the pet. So don't enter into it lightly. But if you are thinking about getting a pet, adopting one in need is a wonderful blessing. So please take a look at a rescue and take a look at Jackson. If you've enjoyed our episode, please like and subscribe to us. We will be getting back to the Plano City Council retreat in our next episode. And part 1 of our recording is up on our website. This is Esther
And Ruth.
for Plano's Political Pit Bull signing off.